I want to start off and ask each of you to raise your hand if you've ever thought somebody was getting too big for their britches. All right. So lots over here, lots over here. This intersection, not so much. I envy you. Maybe cynically, maybe y'all might be the ones that were too big for your britches. I doubt that, though, seeing who's sitting there. But this seems to be a near universal experience where we know or we meet somebody and we just like, they're getting a little too big for their britches. Maybe it was when your kids were in middle school or you were dealing with middle schoolers or high schoolers. I know my parents thought that about me an awful lot. Maybe they still do. Could have been someone that you just met with, like an associate, somebody in your friend group every now and again, a coworker or a supervisor, or even the boss. I think most of us probably think the boss at one point or another has gotten too big for their britches. I know y'all have never thought that about me. I know that. So anyway, oftentimes when we have that happening and someone's getting too big for their britches, it's annoying or frustrating. Most of the time, right? It's like, just take it down a notch. It'll be okay. But there are those times where it does get to go beyond frustrating and it becomes harmful or detrimental. And there are also those times where somebody's gotten too big for their britches and it actually can be fatal. Like when someone is ill-prepared to go up Everest and they're climbing it. And they're doing it mostly for the ego thing, to stand on top of the world. That's a little too big for your britches, and your ego sort of can lead to fatalities. And then we also remember what was a few months ago when the world was obsessed with the news about that submarine that wasn't regulated, and a lot of folks were saying they got a little too big for their britches. It shouldn't have happened. It's sad that it happened, but it's got a little too big for their britches. Our passage for today comes from the events of Holy Week. This is actually the Monday of Holy Week. And in this passage, the chief priests and the elders reveal that they think Jesus has gotten too big for his britches. And we know this is nothing new. This has been something they've been thinking for a long time, but they get rather explicit about it in this passage. You see, Jesus has just led a massive protest, massive march into the city of Jerusalem in support of the common people being saved from the rich and powerful. We typically call this Palm Sunday or the triumphal entry, but if we're honest, it looks an awful lot like a march and a protest. And it was a protest against the power, the might, and really the impunity of Rome. And it should be decently well known across the board that Rome did not like protests unless those protests were backed by their own legions. Most governments don't like protests, and Rome was no exception. It should be no surprise that Jesus is executed a week after such an event, and that's also why the chief priests are amping up this attempt and their desire to distance themselves from Jesus. Jesus is not speaking for us and for all the people. He's way out there. He's gotten too big for his britches. We're okay. Rome, don't take it out on us. And they do that by trying to trap Jesus into losing his support, or the support of the people. They come to him and they say, where do you get the authority to do these things? The triumphal entry, the healing of sin, or the forgiveness of sins, healing people, making all these controversial and hard statements. Where do you get the authority to do this? They might as well have said, you've gotten too big for your britches and we've got to take you down a notch before you take us down with you. They're saying, who are you to lead the people? And Jesus, being Jesus, he does the most Jesus-y thing, and he doesn't answer their question, but asks another question. Probably another reason why Christians should be cautious about giving answers and solid answers all the time. Even though John the Baptizer was quite popular with the people from all spectrum of society, it seems that the chief priests and the elders never really took a stance on his ministry. Jesus asked them, did his authority come from God or from somewhere else? And they know they can't answer this question because the people believe that his authority, his ministry came from God. But if they say that, then Jesus is going to come back with the got you, like, then why didn't you believe him? And if they say it came from somewhere else, I mean, they are going to be the ones that lose all their popular support with the people or from the people. So they cannot and do not answer Jesus' question, and neither does Jesus answer theirs. Or does he? It's not explicit, but Jesus does answer that question and their implied accusation that he's gotten too big for his britches. And today, we know that there's a lot of talk about people getting too big for their britches. It seems like everyone in society, no matter what group you are, where you are on the spectrum of society, there is someone out there who is saying that you've gotten too big for your britches, or this group that you affiliate with or you're a part of has gotten too big for their britches. I started to make a list of all of them, and after about 30 seconds, I gave up because it was just too many. None of us would have to look very hard to find someone who would say that you are part of a group that has gotten too big for your britches. We are surrounded by these accusations. We're in the same place where Jesus was. And it seems that we are increasingly surrounded by resentful accusations against other people. So it's not just you've gotten too big for your britches, but more we resent you for that. There's a hostility that we see that is still veiled with Jesus here. And these accusations against the other people are increasingly ignoring the image of God and ignoring the humanity of the other group. And the sad thing is, or the funny thing is that whatever group it is that's had these accusations thrown against them, there's also people who are saying, pointing the other way, no, it's not us who have gotten too big for our britches, it's them over there. We just keep ping-ponging back and forth with this. And all of these messages make it difficult for many of us to actually pay attention to the truth, to discern who is actually more aligned with the work that Jesus would have us do amid all of this messaging. And the extra scary thing for me is we all have this tendency that if we agree with something, we automatically assume that Jesus would agree with it too. But we know that is not true if we're honest. That's just our natural inclination, all of us. And one of the things I like to talk about a lot is how Jesus almost always acts first and foremost with compassion. And while compassion does not show up at all in this interaction, in this story, it's helpful to ask who is demonstrating compassion when we're trying to navigate all of this messaging around us. The ones who demonstrate, who enact, who bring out compassion tend to be the ones more closely aligned with the work of Jesus. Not saying they are fully aligned, but more closely aligned. But compassion is not part of this story. So how does Jesus answer their accusation that he's gotten too big for his britches and give us a way to understand and navigate those same accusations that we are surrounded by? To figure out what would Jesus have us do? How would Jesus have us be in this time? He tells a parable about a man who had 2 sons. He goes to both of them to say, hey, I need some help in the vineyard. Please go work in the vineyard today. And the first one said he would not, but then actually did go to the vineyard and do some work. And the second one said that he would, but did not. I won't ask you which of those you mostly identify with, because that's between you and God. And then Jesus asked those who are challenging, which of the sons did the will of the Father? They answered with the first one, the one who did go and do the work in the vineyard, but said he wouldn't. This is Jesus telling his adversaries and everyone else, including you and me, to pay more attention to what people do and less to what they say. And I think it's safe, this is an assumption on my part, but I think it's a safe assumption that we could add, given our current context, pay even less attention to what people are saying about them. Basically, ignore the rhetoric about them, whoever the them is. Take what they say with a grain of salt, but pay very close attention to what they do. In the Gospel of John, Jesus tells us to produce good fruit. And Galatians defines that fruit. Y'all know what I'm about to do, the chant. Y'all remember the chant? Anybody? Go fruits. Yeah, y'all know that one? We did it a couple years last summer, and I've tried to do it a couple times since then. But Amy, can you throw it up there? Yeah. All right. L, J, P, P, K, G, F, G, S. Go fruits. It's a very easy way to remember those, okay? Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Jesus says to produce good fruit in John. That's how Paul defines those fruit. Probably not limited just to that, or is not limited just to those, but that's how Paul defines those fruit. That's a good place to start. It really is. We should cultivate those in our lives every day, but when we're looking at all the messaging around us, it's sometimes really difficult to see the fruits of people's actions immediately. Those of you who ever teach anything, whether it be music or at school, you know that the first time you teach the kids something, they're probably not going to get it. It's not going to sink in. But the second time it might, or the third time. I've heard Katie teaching music to some of her students, and they get it, but it takes some time. The fruit doesn't bear immediately. Apples don't get pollinated one day and get harvested the next. It takes time. So maybe we should ask what is being farmed. Not necessarily what's being produced, but what is being farmed? What is the goal? What is the hoped for fruit? These two sons were not asked to go into the vineyard to do the harvest. If that was the case, as Ken reminded me this week, when it's harvest time in the vineyard, everyone is on deck right then, that day. The son would not have had the option to not be there. They've been asked to go and tend the vines so that the vines can later produce good fruit. So we can ask what kind of fruit is being farmed and cultivated by those different peoples and different groups who are demeaning others through messages that are, in essence, they've gotten too big for their britches. Are they farming animosity and divisiveness, or are they farming compassion and building community and relationships? Are they farming anger and hostilities or peace? And again, it's important to pay attention to what the person or the people or the groups or whatever it is that you're thinking about or engaging with. Not what they are saying, but what are they doing? And ignore the rhetoric about what others are saying about them. I am more and more convinced the great sin and the great challenge of this time and this place is the fact that so much in our society is pushing us apart, actively trying to divide us, actively farming hostilities. The great sin that we face is the temptation to back into our corners and demonize whoever is not in our corner with us. The great sin is the prevalence of lies and conspiracy theories that farm the fruit of divisiveness and hostilities. Sounds a lot like what Jesus was going through during Holy Week, doesn't it? And we know that that week, at least according to the human level of events, that narrative won. Jesus was crucified. But then Easter gives us hope that that doesn't have to be the way it is today. So amid all the messaging surrounding us, that so-and-so is getting too big for their britches. Instead of paying attention to that rhetoric, let's pay attention to the fruit that is being farmed. Ignore what people are saying, but pay attention to what's actually being done. And let us choose to help farm love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And of course, even though it's not part of this passage, it's what Jesus did. So let's always remember to do those things with compassion. Because once compassion goes out the window, we're not actually farming the fruit of the Spirit.